You do not suffer from events, you suffer from the interpretation you attach to them. The same moment that weakens one person sharpens another. The difference is not luck, nor circumstance, but judgment. Most people never question this process. They assume their first interpretation is truth. It is not. The habit of interpreting in your favor is not denial, nor blind optimism. It is discipline. It is the deliberate act of choosing the most constructive meaning available, without violating reality. When something happens, your mind rushes to label it unfair, embarrassing, unlucky. But this reflex is untrained. Left unchecked, it becomes a quiet form of self-sabotage. To interpret in your favor is to interrupt that reflex. It is to ask, what strengthens me here? What trains me? What removes illusion? This is not comfort, it is control. And control begins exactly where your interpretation does. You do not suffer from events, you suffer from the interpretation you attach to them. This is not a poetic claim. It is mechanical. The event happens once. The interpretation repeats. That repetition is where suffering is constructed. Define the structure clearly. An event is neutral in its raw form, it is simply what occurred. The mind intervenes immediately after, assigning meaning, intention, and consequence. This assignment feels automatic, but it is not objective. It is conditioned. Years of unexamined reactions create a default lens, and that lens tends to favor threat, loss, and personal offense. Examine a common situation. You send a message. There is no reply. The event, silence. The interpretation, I am being ignored, or I said something wrong, or they do not respect me. None of these are contained in the event itself. They are constructions layered on top. Yet the body reacts as if they are facts, tension rises, focus breaks, behavior shifts. Shift the internal process. The same silence can be interpreted differently, they are occupied. There is incomplete information, or no conclusion can be drawn yet. Notice what changes. The event remains identical. Only the interpretation moves. And with it, your internal state stabilizes. Stabilization is not accidental. It is the result of selecting interpretations that do not weaken your position. This is the core of interpreting in your favor. It is not about inventing comforting stories. It is about refusing interpretations that introduce unnecessary damage when the evidence does not demand them. Most people resist this because they confuse interpretation with truth. They believe their first reaction is accurate simply because it is immediate. But immediacy is not accuracy, it is habit. And habit, when left untrained, defaults to distortion. Structure the correction. When an event occurs, separate it from your reaction. Identify what is known and what is assumed. Most of what disturbs you will fall into the category of assumption. That is where intervention is possible. That is where discipline is applied. Select the interpretation that preserves function. Not the one that flatters you, but the one that keeps your judgment clear and your behavior effective. If multiple explanations are possible, choose the one that does not degrade your focus or stability. This is not self-deception. It is strategic clarity under uncertainty. Sustain this practice consistently. One corrected interpretation is not enough. The habit is built through repetition. Each time you intercept a destructive assumption and replace it with a controlled alternative, you reduce the influence of your previous conditioning. The result is not emotional comfort. The result is operational control. Events will continue. Uncertainty will remain. But the space between what happens and what it means will no longer be uncontrolled. That space becomes governed. And once governed, it stops working against you. You do not suffer from events, you suffer from the interpretation you attach to them. The difficulty is not understanding this, it is applying it under pressure. When the event carries emotional weight, the speed of interpretation increases. The mind does not pause to examine. It reacts, assigns meaning, and locks it in as reality. Define the failure point precisely. The problem is not that interpretations exist. The problem is that they are accepted without verification. The first version becomes final. No alternative is considered. This creates a closed loop where assumption replaces observation. Examine a more demanding scenario. You are criticized in front of others. The event, words are spoken. The interpretation, I have been disrespected, my position is weakened, this should not have happened. These interpretations immediately trigger defensiveness, tension, and reactive behavior. The situation escalates, not because of the event itself, but because of the meaning assigned to it. Shift the internal response deliberately. The same criticism can be processed differently. Information is being presented, there may be accuracy within this is an opportunity to refine. This does not deny the possibility of unfairness. It suspends premature judgment. It keeps the system open. Openness is functional. When interpretation remains flexible, behavior remains controlled. You can listen without immediate resistance. You can extract what is useful. You can discard what is not, without internal disruption. The external situation remains the same, but your position within it changes. Most individuals collapse this process. They fuse event and interpretation into a single unit. Criticism becomes disrespect. Silence becomes rejection. Delay becomes failure. This fusion eliminates space, the exact space where control should exist. Reintroduce that space intentionally. When an event occurs, delay interpretation by a fraction. Not to avoid judgment, but to refine it. Ask, what is directly observable? What is being inferred? What evidence supports this conclusion? This sequence interrupts automatic distortion. Stability follows structure. When interpretation is filtered through examination, it becomes aligned with reality instead of reaction. This alignment reduces unnecessary escalation. It also improves decision-making. You act based on what is known, not what is assumed. There is resistance to this discipline because it removes a familiar pattern. Immediate interpretation provides a sense of certainty, even when inaccurate. Letting go of that certainty feels unstable. But that instability is temporary. It is the transition from reflex to control. Maintain the standard. Interpretation must serve function, not emotion. If a conclusion weakens your clarity, narrows your options, or drives impulsive behavior, it is unfit, regardless of how convincing it feels. Replace it with one that preserves composure and expands your ability to respond. Over time, the speed of disciplined interpretation increases. What was once a deliberate process becomes efficient. The delay shortens, but the structure remains. You no longer accept the first meaning offered. You select the one that aligns with control. The event still occurs once. But now, the interpretation does not repeat as a source of disturbance. It is processed, contained, and used. This is the shift, from being shaped by interpretation to directing it. You do not suffer from events, you suffer from the interpretation you attach to them. The deeper issue is not misinterpretation, it is the unconscious loyalty to interpretations that weaken you. Even when alternatives exist, most people return to the version that confirms discomfort, doubt, or self-limitation. This is not accidental. It is conditioned preference. Define this mechanism clearly. The mind does not only react, it selects. And its selection is influenced by past repetition. If you have consistently interpreted events as personal attacks, failures, or disadvantages, that pathway becomes dominant. It activates faster. It feels more true, not because it is accurate, but because it is familiar. Examine a recurring pattern. You attempt something and it does not succeed immediately. The event, incomplete result. The interpretation, I am not capable, this is not for me, others do this better. These conclusions appear efficient. They close the situation quickly. But they do so by collapsing possibility. They replace analysis with identity judgment. Shift the internal operation. The same incomplete result can be processed differently. The method was insufficient, the timing was off, adjustment is required. Notice the distinction. The focus moves from self-definition to process evaluation. The event remains unchanged, but its implications are no longer restrictive. Restriction is the hidden cost of poor interpretation. When meaning is assigned in a way that limits action, the event extends its impact beyond its actual scope. A single outcome becomes a general rule. A temporary condition becomes a fixed identity. This is how interpretation compounds damage. Interrupt that expansion. Keep interpretation contained within the boundaries of evidence. If the event does not logically justify a global conclusion, do not permit one. This requires active rejection of exaggerated meaning. Not suppression, rejection based on structure. Most people do not apply this filter. They allow interpretations to scale without constraint. A minor error becomes I always fail. A moment of rejection becomes I am not valued. These are not observations. They are distortions produced by unregulated interpretation. Reconstruct the discipline. When an interpretation arises, test its scope. Ask, does this conclusion extend beyond what the event directly supports? If it does, reduce it. Bring it back to what is verifiable. This maintains accuracy and prevents unnecessary limitation. Stability increases when interpretation remains proportional. You deal with what is present, not what is imagined. This preserves energy. It also preserves adaptability. When meaning is not inflated, response remains precise. There is a secondary shift that occurs with consistent practice. You begin to recognize the moment before interpretation solidifies. That moment is brief, but it is accessible. It is where the initial reaction can still be redirected. Acting there prevents the need for later correction. Develop sensitivity to that moment. It is marked by immediacy, the instant a label forms. Instead of accepting it, pause just enough to examine it. This pause is not hesitation. It is control inserted at the correct point in the sequence. Over time, the preference for weakening interpretations diminishes. Not because they disappear, but because they are no longer selected. The mind continues to generate options, but you no longer default to the ones that restrict function. The event still occurs once. But now, interpretation does not amplify it into something larger, heavier, or more permanent than it is. It remains contained, examined, and directed. This is where discipline replaces conditioning. You do not suffer from events, you suffer from the interpretation you attach to them. At this stage, the issue is no longer awareness or identification. The issue is consistency under repetition. A single corrected interpretation does not establish control. Stability is determined by how interpretation behaves across repeated exposure to similar events. Define the constraint. The environment does not change to accommodate your discipline. The same types of events will recur: delay, criticism, uncertainty, rejection, error. Each instance presents a new opportunity to either reinforce the trained interpretation or revert to the conditioned one. This is where most breakdowns occur. Examine a repeated pattern. You begin to apply controlled interpretation in isolated moments. You respond to one instance of delay with neutrality. You process one instance of criticism with structure. But when the pattern repeats, multiple delays, repeated criticism, the mind accumulates tension. It begins to revert. This keeps happening. There is a pattern of failure. This is becoming a problem. The interpretation expands again. Shift the frame of repetition. Repetition does not validate distortion. It increases the demand for precision. Multiple occurrences do not justify exaggerated meaning, they require stricter containment. Each event must be evaluated independently, not aggregated into a narrative that was never objectively confirmed. Aggregation is the failure point. When separate events are grouped into a single interpretation, the conclusion becomes heavier than any individual occurrence. A delay is no longer a delay, it becomes consistent neglect. A critique is no longer feedback, it becomes systematic disrespect. These are constructions, not observations. Interrupt aggregation deliberately. Treat each event as discrete. Even if patterns exist, they must be established through evidence, not assumption. This requires separating frequency from meaning. Frequency indicates recurrence, it does not automatically define intent or outcome. Stabilize interpretation across repetition. The same filtering process must apply every time: what is observable, what is inferred, what is supported. No shortcuts. The presence of prior events does not eliminate the need for verification in the current one. Each interpretation must stand on its own structure. There is a practical resistance here. The mind seeks efficiency. It prefers to reuse previous conclusions instead of recalculating. But this efficiency is flawed when the original conclusion was unverified. Reusing it compounds error. Discipline requires recalculation until accuracy becomes consistent. Introduce a stricter standard. If an interpretation cannot be supported directly by the current event, it cannot be applied, regardless of past impressions. This prevents the accumulation of distortion over time. It also prevents escalation that is disconnected from reality. Maintain functional neutrality under repetition. This does not mean ignoring patterns. It means refusing to define them prematurely. If a pattern is real, it will remain visible under objective evaluation. There is no need to reinforce it through assumption. As this stabilizes, a shift occurs in how repetition is experienced. Instead of increasing internal pressure, repeated events become predictable inputs. They no longer trigger expanded interpretation. They are processed through the same controlled framework, without escalation. The event still occurs once. Even when repeated, each instance remains singular in structure. Interpretation must match that structure. It must not accumulate beyond what is present. This is where discipline becomes durable. Not in isolated clarity, but in repeated application without drift. Interpretation remains controlled not once, but continuously. And continuity is what prevents regression. You do not suffer from events, you suffer from the interpretation you attach to them. At this level, the discipline is no longer about correcting obvious distortions. It is about refining subtle ones, the interpretations that appear reasonable, justified, even logical, but still degrade your position over time. Define the distinction. Not all harmful interpretations are extreme. Many are moderate, socially accepted, and internally reinforced by consensus. This is stressful, this is frustrating, this is unfair. These statements often pass without resistance because they appear accurate. But accuracy is not the only criterion. The question is whether the interpretation maintains or reduces your operational clarity. Examine a refined scenario. You are given additional responsibility without recognition. The event, increased demand. The interpretation, this is unfair, my effort is not valued, this should be acknowledged. These interpretations may contain elements of truth. But observe their effect. They introduce resistance, reduce focus, and divide attention between execution and internal objection. Shift the evaluation standard. Instead of asking whether an interpretation is justified, ask whether it is functional. A functional interpretation preserves your ability to act effectively within the current conditions. It does not deny external realities, it prioritizes internal stability. Reconstruct the same situation. Additional responsibility increases exposure. This is an opportunity to demonstrate capacity. Evaluation can be addressed separately. Notice the change. The interpretation does not ignore imbalance. It reorganizes focus. Execution is preserved. Response becomes deliberate instead of reactive. This is the advanced layer of interpreting in your favor. It is no longer about avoiding negative assumptions. It is about selecting interpretations that optimize performance under constraint. Even when the environment is imperfect, interpretation remains aligned with function. Most individuals resist this refinement because it removes a familiar form of justification. Interpreting events as unfair provides a sense of validation. It explains discomfort, but it also anchors attention to conditions that are not immediately controllable. This reduces effectiveness. Separate validation from utility. An interpretation can be valid and still be counterproductive. Recognizing this allows you to choose differently, not based on denial, but based on outcome. The goal is not to feel correct. The goal is to remain effective. Introduce a higher filter. Every interpretation must pass two conditions: it must not contradict observable reality, and it must not weaken your capacity to respond. If it fails either, it is unfit. This filter eliminates both distortion and self-sabotage. Sustain this standard consistently. The refinement lies in repetition under subtle pressure, minor inconveniences, small imbalances, quiet frustrations. These are the moments where discipline typically relaxes. But they are also where cumulative degradation begins. Prevent that accumulation. Each small interpretation contributes to overall stability or instability. When left unexamined, minor distortions stack into a persistent internal state of resistance. When controlled, they maintain a steady baseline of clarity. There is no final point where interpretation becomes automatic and permanently stable. The process remains active. But with training, the effort required decreases. Selection becomes faster. The gap between event and controlled interpretation narrows. The event still occurs once. Interpretation still follows. But now, even at its most subtle level, it is aligned with function. It does not introduce friction where none is required. It does not expand beyond what is useful. This is the completion of the discipline. Not perfection, but consistency. Interpretation no longer operates as an uncontrolled reaction. It operates as a governed process, deliberate, structured, and aligned with your capacity to act. You do not suffer from events, you suffer from the interpretation you attach to them. This remains constant from the first moment of awareness to the final stage of refinement. The event does not carry inherent meaning. Meaning is assigned. And what is assigned can be directed. The discipline is not in eliminating interpretation. It is in governing it. Each section has established a layer of control, separating event from assumption, delaying premature conclusions, preventing expansion beyond evidence, stabilizing interpretation under repetition, and refining even justified but unproductive meanings. These are not isolated techniques. They form a single system. Within this system, interpretation is no longer reactive. It is selected. The selection is based on structure, not impulse. It is evaluated against reality and against function. If it fails either, it is removed. This creates a consistent internal environment where response remains stable regardless of external variation. There is no requirement for events to improve. There is no dependency on fairness, recognition, or predictability. Control exists independently of these conditions. It exists at the point where meaning is formed. The event occurs once. Interpretation follows. And in that sequence, discipline determines whether the outcome is distortion or clarity. The habit is not passive. It is maintained. And when maintained, it ensures that nothing external is allowed to define your internal position without examination.